And so let me introduce myself real quick. My name's Greg Coates, Director of Product Management. Been working with the integration product for what seems forever. And Chris Gilson is joining me. He's the Senior Director of Integration. He's also been working with the product for what seems like forever. We go back quite a ways, maybe even into 2 decades worth, as it were. And I kind of like to think of myself as the brains of the operation, but Chris is the one that actually gets all the work done. So I have to give him the credit for everything. And I don't know, Chris, if you want to say anything, just to introduce yourself. Or
sure. Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Gilson. As Greg said, I manage the engineering team that oversees DataConnect. I'm really happy that you're here. I'm very excited about the version 12 release and excited to share some aspects of that with you today. So we'll let Greg go through some of the kind of backstory around why we're building some of these things or why we built some of those things, and then I'll get into some of the demo and show you guys how it works, and hopefully describe the value to you, and then we'll take a look at some roadmap items that I think Greg wants to cover and handle some questions after that. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, awesome, thanks. And I think that's probably what it says on the next slide or two. So if you don't mind flipping on to the next one, we'll get started. Yeah, that's the agenda. Well, I want to introduce kind of a little bit more about data profiling and the feature that we've added in version 12. And then show you just some real quick highlights of the release. And then I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to do a more of an in-depth demo and show you some of the features at that level. Then we'll come back up. I'll give you a real quick look at the upcoming version of Integration Manager, and then show you a brief kind of conversation about the roadmap, as Chris said. So with that in mind, just let's step back and take a look at what we see as the key feature for this release of DataConnect 12, and it is DataProfiler, and kind of have to think of it like from a perspective of why we introduced this. It's something that we do as part of almost every day. It's no surprise to the folks on this call, but anytime you're doing a data integration, you have an opportunity to assess the quality of your data and make improvements to it. I mean, that's data transformation is a big part of any integration pipeline, and that's exactly what we're doing here. And when you look at data quality as a whole, it's a process, an iterative process, but profiling is the very first, arguably the first thing that you do as part of that process. And you have to assess the data first to find out and identify what you need to clean, and not just what you need to clean or standardize, but where are the major problem areas, so you can focus your time on the higher value areas and not necessarily create some elaborate solution or really elegant solution for something that happens only maybe 0.5% of the time. But when you see problems in the data that occur over and over, then you know that's exactly where you need to focus your efforts. And once you identify those problems, then you can just use the everyday data transformation techniques that you're already doing with DataConnect. So if you look at things like completeness, if you're missing data, then you can do things like lookups, or get an average value from a column and plug those in to enrich the data, or inject values that weren't there from its original source and take corrective actions that way. And you can use this statistical metrics like min, max, and average to not only plug in missing values, but even to drive logic in the other business rules that you build into your transformation maps and your processes. So the first few iterations of DataProfiler, as we introduce it in 12, we're going to focus on really on those first 4 aspects: the completeness, uniqueness, validity, and accuracy. I kind of see validity and accuracy as being kind of going hand in hand, but generally speaking, these are things that you identify at each time that you run an instance of the profile and you get a report. That's where we'll focus the first few iterations, and as we gain information and we see patterns emerge, then we'll start to work on solutions that are more that cater more to the consistency and timeliness aspects, which do have that time dimension, that you need to see multiple iterations of a profile. And once you see patterns emerge, you can start to build solutions to resolve those kinds of problems also. As an example, you run a profile against some data source like Salesforce or ServiceNow repeatedly, and you start to see a pattern that one particular object in that SaaS application has more bad data than everywhere else you see. Then you can start to go upstream and start to rectify the problem at the source rather than waiting until it gets to you as a data integration user that needs to correct the problem before you move it to its next point in time. So just a little bit about kind of the overall processes and again, why we're bringing DataProfiler into DataConnect. And on the next slide, it really addresses how we're doing that. And we wanted to bring it into Studio as just another tab that allows you to kind of seamlessly build profiles into your data integration pipelines today. And so instead of building a new user interface or a whole new application for that matter, we really wanted to try to reuse as much of the functionality that was already in Studio that you guys are familiar with, so that as you continue working on your data integrations, you can just start to use data profiles as part of those overall workflows. And then there's a few things that we added, like the auto-gen rule set. It's great for helping the users get started. Some good examples of how you can apply the rules and which metrics to use, but also it's like once you have built out a set of default rules that you want to apply to any of your source data sets, then you can use that as a way to quickly discover the problems and again assess what the problems are, where they are, and that way you can plan on how to fix them using the transformation techniques that you already know. And then a couple other things we did. Chris is going to show you all this, so I'll just move along here. But we set the targets for you, and we may enhance this over time. I'm sure we will, but how we enhance it remains to be seen. But the idea here was that let's just provide the connectors and the connections that we know work and that we know are useful and that you can plug into your current process workflows. And so they still support macros, and you can change the location and that sort of thing. So they're still flexible and dynamic in that regard. But again, we wanted to just make it as simple and as easy for you to implement and get started with as we could. So that's the reason we started with this in its current form. And one more thing on the next slide, if I do want to take just a minute to say thanks again to some people. I didn't get their permission to do this, so I'm not going to show you their last names. They know who they are. They did a really good job of helping us assess DataProfiler. So these folks spent their time doing some beta testing for us, and then actually even doing some one-on-one personal interviews that our new UX team here at Actian helped to gain some great insights from them, and we're going to implement those insights into some of the upcoming enhancements in new releases of DataProfiler over the year. So again, thanks to everybody who responded to our surveys last year, but most importantly, thanks to these folks who actually took extra time and did some direct conversations with us. So we really appreciated that. And then the next slide is kind of a bit of an eye chart. It's the scope of the release for version 12. So I'm not going to read everything to you necessarily. Chris, again, is going to show you a lot of these in demo form. So one thing I will stress here that I want to make sure everybody's aware of is that this release is, while it is a major release and it's a big feature release for us, it's the same architecture, same event model, the same JSON metadata that we had for version 11. So in that regard, if you've been around with us for a while, you may have struggled a little bit through the upgrades from 9 to 11, or even from 10 to 11. And just again, wanted to reassure you that this is effectively the same architecture as version 11. It's really just additive in that we're adding new features. And we've updated some of the platform components, Java, for instance, and we're supporting newer platforms like Red Hat 8. But by and large, it's the same thing that you are familiar with version 11. Certainly not a migration in any sense of the words. You really can just install the software and start using the existing maps and processes that you have already created. So I guess with that in mind, Chris, unless you want to talk about any of these things on this slide, I know you have another one and you've got a lot more detail in your demo, so I'll just turn it over to you.
Just move on. Okay, thank you, Greg. So this is what we're going to cover during the demo. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about DataProfiler. We want to give you guys some insight in terms of how it works. We've got a new wizard within DataConnect that will allow you to change connectors within existing maps. So I want to take the time to go through that and show you all the different options there. There's a host of UX changes we've made to version 12, and I've cherry-picked a few that I think will be of interest to most everybody on the call, and then we'll wrap up by talking about some of the changes we've made with compatibility mode. So if you just give me a moment, I will exit out of the slide and we'll start our demo. Just one moment. Okay. And so before we start with the demo, I do want to reiterate what Greg was saying. Version 12 is architecturally very similar to version 11. You don't need to migrate or upgrade. All you need to do is install version 12 in the same way that you installed 11 and then point to an existing workspace or create a new workspace. So let's go ahead and get started with DataProfiler. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term data profiling, profiling, as Greg was alluding to earlier, is essentially a way of analyzing data to identify inconsistencies, anomalies, and data quality problems in general. Once the data has been profiled, you'll have a clear understanding of what types of data quality problems you have and how prevalent they are. And for the sake of the demo, I'm going to stick to the three most common data quality attributes, which are invalid, duplicate, and incomplete data. And there are a few things that I want to mention or point out. First, in the way that we implemented DataProfiler, it's very flexible. So it's going to allow you to define data quality as it suits you. Every data feed is different, every project is different, and likely you'll have vastly different data quality standards depending on the requirements of your project. Also, reusability is another key part of DataProfiler. I'll highlight some of that during the demo, but really essentially you can create saved connections and custom data quality set rules that Greg mentioned earlier, and those can be reused over and over again. And then with our new DataProfiler Invoker component, you can leverage your profiles as part of your process designer workflows. So what I'm showing you currently is version 12, and this is the DataProfiler editor. And you're going to notice that it aesthetically is very similar to Map Designer. And just like with Map Designer, I'm going to configure a source connection. I'm configuring target connections, and I'm doing that to read data in and write data out. But unlike Map Designer, we're not transforming the data. Instead, we're executing the profile rules, which can be found right here in this profile tab, against the data that we define in the source tab. The output is being written to the targets that we define here, and insight can be identified or discovered on the statistics tab. So I want to go through all these tabs with you really quickly, but I'm going to start kind of backwards. I'm going to start at the end first. So this is essentially what you would see once a profile has been designed and run. And on the left side here, what you're looking at is essentially a grid with links to a bunch of charts. So this is the results. The first two charts that you have in here are essentially aggregate summaries of all these different data quality rules that I've added to this profile. And each one of these rules is looking for a different thing. It has a different condition that it's evaluating the source data against. But I can come in really quickly and click on any one of these links, and I'll have this chart displayed over here, which is giving me a summary telling me that 20 records passed these data quality rules and 14 failed. And I can even click on this bar chart and get a different view of the same data, but again, it's going to tell me how many different kinds of data quality issues I have and which ones are most prevalent, right? And the great thing, this is new to DataConnect, in the sense that we have drill down reporting. So I can literally click on the pass or fail here and get it to show up in the browser. I need to rerun this to be able to do that, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But you have the ability to click on any one of these, and the data that is associated with that pass data set or that fail data set will show up in the browser. So let's go back to the source tab and kind of start at the beginning. So this is just like Map Designer in the sense that I come in here to select a connector and I configure that connection. In this case, I'm giving it a path and file name. I can adjust the properties if I need to, and I can browse that source. I can also save this connection by clicking this icon over here. And what it's going to do by default, it's going to save this connection in this folder in my workspace called UD Connections, which stands for User Defined Connections. This has been in the product for a while, and it's a great way to just reuse connections over and over again. And it makes it a lot faster to build maps. But also, if you created any of those saved connections in the past with Map Designer, you can certainly reuse them with DataProfiler. So the Profile tab, this is where you're going to spend the majority of your time in DataProfiler. The Profile tab has two sections to it. You have the metrics section here and the output field section over here. So you can see here all the different data quality rules that I've added to this profile here in this section. On the right-hand side, the output fields, this really dictates the fields that are going to be written to my targets. So imagine, if you will, that you're working with a data set that maybe has 50 fields, 100 fields, and you're really only interested in a couple of them. So you can simply just come in and check these and save it and run it. And these are the only two fields that'll be written to the output files. If you don't check anything, then everything is written to the output. We're going to come back to the profile tab in just a moment, but we'd like to get through the rest of the tabs real quick. So the target tab, again, very similar to Map Designer. The only difference here is a profile has by default 4 different targets. You have a pass, a fail target, a drill down target, and stats target. So the drill down target supports the click-through reporting that we have on the statistics tab, where you're able to click through those charts. The stats target essentially contains a summary of all the pass-fail details, and you can use that to serve it up to like a BI tool and track your data quality over a period of time. The pass target and the fail target, most of these data quality rules, not all, but most, it's effectively what they're doing is they're providing a condition, right? And you're looking at a given column in your data set, and you're looking to see if the values in that column meet a specific condition. If they do meet that condition, then we're going to write it to the pass target. If they don't, we'll write it to the fail target. And so by default, we're pre-configuring all these connections for you. You can edit them, you can change the connector, write it out to a database, whatever you'd like. But by default, we're pre-configuring them to your existing workspace or your active workspace. So you can see my active workspace here is internal demo, and you can see that right there. And then it's also going into my current project. So my current project is DataProfiler. Now, how we're naming these particular output files, we're giving it the same name as the profile itself. And then we're appending the type of target it is. So you'll see here, I'm looking at the fail target, and that is named _fail. If I go to pass, it's going to be the same thing, _pass. So I'll have all that stuff readily accessible right here in my project if I want to look at it. The configuration tab, much like Process Designer, Map Designer, I can come in and configure my logging options, and I can also manage the macros that I'm using. Okay, and so let's go back to the profile tab, since we've already looked at statistics, and we'll go back to it in a minute. Profiling can be very iterative, right? So the purpose of profiling is to identify data quality problems. And so quite naturally, I may want to go and look at my data in the source data browser as a reference and see and identify various data quality issues that I can see. It could be regarding a pattern or, like we said, invalid, incomplete, duplicate. And the great thing about DataProfiler is I have the ability to create and start to learn and gain insight about my data, but I also have the ability to enable or disable any of these metrics using these two commands or these two buttons down here. So oftentimes I find that I'm starting to learn something, and I may have added a rule that is giving me a different perspective than I expected, and I may want to toggle it on and off and go look at the results again. It makes it really easy to do all that. So let's go ahead and take a look at, we're going to look at 3 of these rules, and they're going to be, like I said, around invalid, duplicate, and incomplete data. This first one is around invalid data. So we can click edit, and this is the dialog that appears that allows me to add a data quality rule in DataProfiler. And so the first thing I'm asked to do is pick a field name. So again, DataProfiler is going to evaluate the values that are in the different columns that I have here in this data set. In this particular case, I'm going to pick title, right? And looking at the title, the data in title, I can make the assumption that what we're looking for are job titles, right? And I can see down here that someone didn't understand what was meant by title, and they put the prefix to their name. And so I can configure a data quality rule to go and look for those anomalies here in this column. So I'm going to use the metric compare to constant. And if you hit this drop down, there's a whole list of them, and we certainly don't have time to go through all of them, but I can pick the metric that I want to use. I can give it a unique name if I want, or DataConnect will give it a name for you. And I have a description here that describes what this rule is going to do. Returns true or false after comparing a field to a constant value. Down in the bottom section, I have the parameters. So down here is where I can specify the values that I want to look for. So I happen to already know that there's the value of misses in here as well. But an important thing to note is I can use a pipe delimiter to specify as many values as I like. And then you have the option to specify an operator as well. And I'll take this out. I'll explain what this invert test does in just a second, but we'll go ahead and finish and save, and then we'll run. And so while profile is running, what's going to happen as soon as it's done is by default, it's going to give focus to the statistics tab. Okay, and we've got our 2 charts up here as we saw before. Now I can click and see the data associated with pass or fail, but also I have the individual chart down here for title that's specific to that rule. So what's great about this is I can click on the failed data, and I can manually go and validate, yes, those are the anomalies I was looking at, and I can define that as dirty data, if you will, clean data versus dirty data. And I can look down through the title column again. I can see there's another problem here, but this rule is doing what I wanted it to do, right? So we can go back to the profile tab again. And a good kind of best practice, I like to always have the source data browser open for reference, so I'll do that again. And in this time, we're going to enable this rule to find incomplete data. So in this particular case, I'm going to evaluate the data that's in the zip code column. And for sake of discussion or demonstration, we'll say that we want to enforce the zip +4 pattern for this particular column. And we can already see that there's some issues there. And so you can handle this in a lot of different ways with DataProfiler using different metrics. But in this particular example, I chose the matches regex pattern, or excuse me, rule. And the reason why I did is I personally think it's a very powerful data quality rule, in the sense that I can provide a regular expression down here to really enforce any pattern that I'd like. Or I could potentially use one of the pre-built expressions by clicking from this list down here. And you can see that we already have that pattern down here. And so again, we get a description here describing what this rule is going to do. Returns true if a field matches a regular expression, returns false otherwise. And again, I do have this invert test checkbox here. And really what that does, if I were to check it, it's essentially flipping the operator. And so we talked about the pass and fail target data sets before. Really what this is going to do is just flip that around. So anything that would normally be written to the pass data set would now be written to the false, and the false would be written to the true. And again, totally configurable by you to meet your definition of data quality. So I'll go ahead and click finish on this and save it and run it. And same thing as before, statistics is given focus, and I can go look at the zip code, click on the past data, and scroll down through my browser and validate yes, all those patterns are being acknowledged, so that looks good. And lastly, we'll look at one more metric here. So I'll go back to my source data browser, and we'll enable this one and edit. And in this case, I'm looking for duplicate data. So again, there's a number of different metrics I could use and a number of different approaches I could take. But first thing I'd really want to do is figure out which column makes sense to monitor for duplicate data. So I might make the argument that we want, this is essentially a list of contact information for the most part, and we probably want to look for unique company names. So what I've done is I've configured this rule to monitor the company column, and I'm using a metric called is not duplicate. It's telling us right here, returns true if a field is not duplicated, returns false otherwise. And so if I click finish and save and run, immediately I've got my bar chart here. I can start to get a sense of what's going on with my data set, where my data quality problems are, how bad they are. But I can go look at company and also validate, those are my duplicates, and validate through here that I see no more duplicates. Okay, so what we've just done, and I'll go ahead and enable the rest of these, and I'll run it real quick. Let me save it. And so what we've done, if we were to agree at this point that we're done profiling, we understand where all of our data quality problems are. What we've done effectively is we've created a data set of quote unquote clean data and a data set of clean quote unquote dirty data, right? And we can look at our dirty data, we can look at our clean data, but within Profiler, if I wanted to, I could write this clean data or this past target onto a different repository, or I could push it on downstream so some other application or mechanism could process it. I can also funnel this off to be remediated and enriched, as Greg was alluding to earlier. So really, that, in a nutshell, what we're looking at here is we're gaining insight on our data, right? And it's also giving us an idea of which data feed is dirtiest and what can I do to reduce the amount of dirty data. It's also giving me the ability to process that clean data immediately, remediate the data that needs to be remediated, and also it's eliminating how should I say? It's eliminating the dirty data being pushed downstream to other systems or being pushed into your repository. You're no longer doing that, right? And so what I just showed you was very iterative. But as Greg mentioned, we have an option called AutoGen. And so I'm going to go create a new profile quickly, and I'll kind of show off some of our reuse. Just give it a name. And so with this profile, I'm going to reuse an existing connection. Right? So that's an existing connection. I'm already connected to it. And now I'm going to go and use the AutoGen option. So AutoGen effectively is a way for users to go and create a set of rules, data quality rules, that they want to reuse over and over. It's a collection of data quality rules, not unlike what you just saw in the last profile I built. But once you have that rule set created, I can simply click that AutoGen button, specify the fields I want to profile, click finish, save it, and run. And I have my insight. And so you can build these data quality, these AutoGen rule sets specific to a given data feed, a specific project. If you have multiple people using DataConnect within your organization, you can share them. It makes profiling very quick. Okay, let's move on from DataProfiler and talk about the DataProfiler Invoker. So the DataProfiler Invoker is a new component within Process Designer. And looking at the properties down here, the only required property is this profile file property right here. And essentially what it's asking, of me is to tell, it wants me to tell it which profile I want it to run, right? So here I'm just giving the path and the name of my profile. And so what's going to happen when I run this process, when it hits this invoker step, it's going to read the property file or the profile file, and it's going to go run that profile for me. So everything else in this properties list, all these things exist in that profile. And within this property sheet, I have the ability to override those values if I want to. Also, just like all the rest of our components, you can leverage DJ messages here too to override those same properties. So in this scripting step, I know it's going to be hard to see, but in this scripting step, I'm doing that very same thing, and they're all commented out, but I'm able to override all those profile properties using DJ messages, and essentially the order of precedence, as it's always been. The order of precedence, as it's always been, is that the DJ message overrides are going to take precedence, followed by the properties here in this file or in the property list, then whatever's listed in the profile. And so back what I was just referring to, if I wanted to, I could take a transformation step and drop it on my canvas and pipe my dirty data to this transformation step and remediate, fix the problems that are with it, cleanse it, enrich it, and then write it on to its final destination or further downstream. So that's another way that you can leverage that component to help you with your data quality. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the connector migration wizard. And so allow me to open up a map here that I've got ready. In DataConnect in the past, if you built a map with a given connector, and at some point in time you wanted to change that connector, the process of doing that was very difficult. Most oftentimes you had to go and edit the map, or excuse me, the XML or JSON documents directly. Once you change a connector in an existing map, what's going to happen is it's going to wipe out all your connection information, you'll lose your schema, etc. So what we've done in version 12, and the specific use case around this, I'll use that as an example here. Let's say that we have some maps that use SQL Server 2012, and we've upgraded to SQL Server 2019. And so now I'd like to upgrade the connectors in these maps to use SQL Server 2019. We have a wizard now in version 12 that will help you do that. There's a number of ways to get into the wizard, and I'll show you all three. But first, I'll go ahead and change this connector to 2019. And what's going to happen is I'm going to get this dialog that pops up. And it's going to give me three options. The first option, overwrite, will behave exactly as Map Designer has always behaved. It's going to clear out all the connection information and I'll lose my schema. Or I can click cancel to get out of the wizard, or I can enter into the wizard by clicking migrate. And at this point, the wizard's going to pop up, and it's smart enough to know all the choices I've already made. It knows I'm working with just this map. It knows that I want to change the connector on the source side, and it knows that the previous connector was SQL Server 2012, and I want to go to SQL Server 2019. So I can just go ahead and click next here. On this page, this is really more useful when I'm doing this in bulk, when I'm changing multiple maps at the same time. But here I'm just essentially just validating, yes, this is the map I want to work with. This is the map I want to update. And if I click next, the next dialog is giving me the ability to change the connection information. So in this scenario, if we're moving from 2012 to 2019, it's likely that it's not going to be on the same server or VM, so this stuff is going to need to change. And I have this option up here called propagate credentials. So I could fill this out to the new values, click that checkbox. If I'm migrating the connectors on several maps, multiple maps, it will write these same credentials, the new credentials, if you will, to all those maps. And so the logic behind this, where the migration is concerned, a key point to make is we're evaluating the schemas. Okay, so here I have this table called accounts. So that's the original table associated with this map. If I'm going to move to a different instance of SQL Server 2019, and I have a new table that I want to use, maybe it's going to be the same structure, maybe it's not. What we're doing is we're evaluating the old schema, if you will, against the proposed new schema for the new table. And the logic behind it is as such. For the new schema, you have to have at least as many fields as the old schema. And the field names have to match at least 50%. So that's the criteria. If the new table that you provide in here meets that criteria, then the wizard will go ahead and process and update the connector for you with this connection information. So I'll go ahead and exit out of this, but I want to bring your attention to something that is down here in Project Explorer under this project. So in going through the wizard, what's going to happen is we're going to create a folder in here called Map Backups. There's a a date stamp here and a time stamp here. You'll notice that the original map, before I made any changes to it, was backed up, and we put an extension of .bak here. So you always have a copy in case you need to revert. All you have to do is open this up and take the extension, open it up in Windows Explorer, and take this extension .bak off of it. That's all you have to do. So that's one way of getting into the wizard. The next, if I go to File, Migrate Connector, the wizard will appear, and this is where all these choices are open to me. So I literally can look through all the maps in my workspace, all the maps in a project, select a single map. I can migrate the connectors on the source side, on the target side. And how this works is let's say that I wanted to search through my whole workspace, and I wanted to go find all the maps that had Ackie and Zen on the source side. We're giving you the option to pick what connector you want to use to replace it with. The logic that we're using here is we're looking for connectors that have similar attributes. In other words, in this particular case, I chose a database, Ackie and Zen. So the list that I'm given is a list of connectors that supports tables, right? So you kind of have to go from an existing type of a connector to the same type of a connector. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's yet another way to get in the wizard, and this is the way to do it if you want to make bulk changes. The last way to get into this wizard is around deprecated connectors. So I'm going to open this map that I have here, and you'll notice this map is called Oracle Siebel On Demand. So this map contains a connection to Oracle using the connector Oracle Siebel On Demand. And Oracle Siebel On Demand is an old connector that we wrote years ago for Oracle Siebel On Demand when it was named that. It's no longer named that. This connector is very old. It's now called Oracle CRM On Demand. But when I open this map that has this deprecated connector in it, it's giving me this dialog here that's saying, if you like, you can go and enter into the migration wizard and update this connector. If you don't want to, you can just click no and exit out. So those are the three different ways that you'll get into the connector migration wizard. Okay. Next, I want to go through some of the UX improvements that we've made. Some of these are smaller improvements, but again, I'm choosing to show them to you because I feel like these are common things that everybody runs into and will appreciate. And also, a lot of these requests for these changes came from you, our users. So definitely want to let you know that they're in here. So first thing is around our macro manager, and we have this control in multiple spots in DataConnect, but this is essentially where I have all my macro sets and all the macros associated with those macro sets. So we've added filters for both the macro sets and the macros themselves. So I can just come in and type, if I'm looking for macros related to SQL Server, I can just type SQL in there and it will filter that down for me. Also, all of the headers in these grids, you can click on them to sort. So if I click first time, it's ascending. If I click second time, it's descending. I think I said that backwards. And the third time, it's original order. And that's available anywhere you have this dialog as well. Also, we added the notion of autocomplete for macros in the product. And so we've always had the paste macro option in here, which brings up that similar dialog, which, by the way, you can sort and you can filter. But we've also added autocomplete. So if you type $left and start typing, you're going to get a filtered list of different macros, and all you have to do is just hit enter to apply. One of the things that we did here is it's possible to have duplicate macro names that reside in different macro sets. So you can see here, I've got two different macros called test data, and I'm getting the reference for which macro set they're in this list, which is really helpful. Okay, next, I'm going to make a change to this map to make it fail. to show you the next improvement. So I'm going to save this and run it, and it's going to fail. And here on the results tab, I'll see the error message. This has been kind of an annoyance for a while, and we finally made some changes here to make an improvement. But in general, when you receive an error that's of any length, oftentimes you have to resize all these columns to get to it, or sometimes you have to hover over it to get to the tooltip, and that doesn't even capture all the language that's there. So what we've done is we've made this error message clickable, right? So I can double click it and I get this dialog that pops up that I can resize. I can select this text in here and copy it and put it in a text, a Word doc or an email or something to reference later. Or I can just simply come in and right click on it and say open, and that does the same thing. Okay, moving on to the mapping tab. So in the past, to add a new field to your target layout, you could click this icon, and what would happen is it would add the new field at the bottom of the layout. If you wanted to, you could grab the field and drag and drop it into whatever order or position you wanted to in your layout. That is problematic when you have a lot of different fields in your target, in the sense that if I have to scroll down, I click add field, and I'd have to scroll down, grab the field that I added and scroll back up and drop it into place. So what we've done in version 12 is you can now specify a particular position that you want to add a field and click add, and it'll add that field right there. And the default name is the position of that field. You can, of course, rename it and move it if you'd like. Another thing that we've added here is we're giving you the ability to edit multiple fields in bulk. So I can select a number of fields here, right click and go to properties. And I can now go and change the data type or any of the properties that I want, and it will change all of them in bulk. Okay. Moving on, we've got some new properties, they're hidden properties for our application connectors, specifically NetSuite, Salesforce, and ServiceNow. In this particular map, I am connected to ServiceNow, and I'm looking at the asset object. And you'll notice in my expression column here in the cells, I've got some shading, some different color. I need to scroll down a little bit because there's going to be a red cell down here, and then I can explain what that is. Okay, so with a lot of these applications, the different fields in various objects have certain restrictions or requirements associated with them. And in the past, there was really no good way of identifying any of those within Map Designer. So typically you'd go and map all your source data to your target, you'd run your map, and you'd have to go look through our log file to see the message that was coming back from the application to tell you you mapped a field that can't be mapped, or you didn't map a field that must be mapped. And so what the color here is indicating to you, if there's no color in it, that means you can certainly map it. If there's a gray cell, that means that the field is not updatable, not creatable, and cannot be mapped. And that's what that tooltip is telling us. And this red color is telling us that the field is required and must be mapped. Okay. Moving on to the next one. We're looking at Schema Designer here, and I've got a 5010 schema loaded up. And if I click on properties, I'm going to see a default value in this schema. In the past, we were never mapping those default values for you. You had to do it yourself. And so one of the changes that we've made it a new preference, is we're now mapping all those default values for you. So let me go to the mapping tab here on this map. And you can see all those default values are now appearing as expressions in my map. And so that's a new preference that we have here. So and it's on by default. If I drill down in my preferences and go down to Map Designer, I'll see it right here, automatically apply target field default value to expression. I can turn that off if I wish, and there's multiple ways to get to that. I can right click here on this context menu and say apply default values, or I can do that from this auto map menu right there. Okay, the last thing I'd like to cover today is to talk about the changes we made around compatibility mode. Okay, so in version 9 of DataConnect, when you created a map or a process and saved it, the metadata format was XML. So when I created a map, it would save as map.xml. In version 10 and version 11, the metadata format changed, and we changed it to JSON. Okay, and so in version 11, we created a property called Compatibility Mode. And so I had the ability to come in and turn on Compatibility Mode. And really all that did for me is it gave me, when I turned that on, whenever I created something new, right, a new map, a new process, what have you, it was going to create it using that old metadata format from version 9. So it would create it as a JSON, or excuse me, an XML document. So now that we've removed it, the only thing that we've removed is the ability to go create an old metadata style artifact, a mapper process, right? What that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that, well, let me rephrase that. We still support and will support those artifacts, those XML artifacts from our engine and from our UI within the studio. So you can see right here, I have a map that's an XML map. Well, literally that it's an XML document and literally that's using the XML connector. But I can open it in the editor. I can save as if I want to edit it. I just can't create any more of them, right? And again, fully supported from our engine, fully supported in the UI, and wanted to make you guys aware of this as well. In one of the latter releases of version 11, I think it was 11.6, we have a new step type. And if you go into preferences, it's not on by default, but I'll show you how to turn it on. If I go into Process Designer and Steps right here, allow using alternative transformations. And that's what it looks like right there. If I use this particular step, what it's going to allow me to do is create a JSON process and reference a map that I may have created in version 9, or I may have created in version 11 with compatibility mode on. So the message I'm trying to send to you is, I don't want you to panic, and I don't want you to think that you have to convert all your existing collateral to JSON. You don't. You'll be able to run it. It runs from the engine. You can use it in the UI. You can create new workflows and reference those old maps if you like. The only thing that we're asking of you is to start using the JSON editors. Okay. I want to encourage you that if you have any questions or concerns around compatibility mode, if you would just mind putting your name and email in chat, then Greg and I will be happy to follow up with you. We can have a call and have a chat about that. Okay, with that, that is the end of the demo. So let me go ahead and bring the presentation back up and turn it over to Greg. So give me just a minute.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's good. Yeah, I would extend that offer. I think you guys know what our email addresses are, so you can reach out anytime. You don't even necessarily have to put it in this chat window, but just feel free to contact us with feedback or questions. And let me spend just a few minutes here talking about Integration Manager, and then I'll wrap up with the roadmap slide. But we will have another webinar in the near future. Probably going to hold off until the beginning of next year, but we'll do a deep dive into Integration Managers. Way too much good stuff to talk about right now. But I did want to give you a sneak peek at what the UI was going to look like, and then one of the big features that we're adding to it. So for those of you who have used Integration Manager, you're probably using it on premise. So you've installed a package locally and you're using it there. We do have some cloud users. So if you're familiar with Integration Manager on our cloud, what we formerly called Data Cloud, that we essentially rebranded as Avalanche. So that now is hosted as a service on our Avalanche platform, and that being Integration Manager. So you can use it there, or you can install it locally. And we've several years ago, when it's in its current form, it started as a cloud-first development effort. So all of the work and all the R&D and all the testing, everything takes place on our cloud platform first, and then periodically we'll roll up those releases and whatever updates have been made, and we'll wrap it into a package and with an installer and deliver it through our software downloads page ESD that everybody calls by shorthand. And that's where you download it and install it yourself. And you're really installing a default configuration of Integration Manager at that case. And so that's really what we're talking about here, this Integration Manager 3.0. While it's being actively worked on our Avalanche platform in the cloud, this will be an on-premise distribution package where you can install it locally as well. And so this is what the new user interface looks like and will look like when you do. And so essentially it's basically a roll-up of all of the releases that have gone into the cloud over the last few months. And most of the changes, not just UI, but we've been working on the configuration wizard for creating new things. And then the big one is the simplified mapping user interface. So on the next page, that's just to give you an idea what this looks like. It only supports these SaaS application endpoints right now: Salesforce, NetSuite, ServiceNow. It also supports our Avalanche data warehouse on the cloud, obviously. But from a pure play integration standpoint, these would be the connectors that you'll have access to in addition to that. And then we will work on delivering on-premise connectivity for files and databases over the upcoming year. And this is a sneak peek of what this Salesforce source connection looks like. So very similar, but it's a web-based interface. And the idea is that while you guys have been working with Studio, that's perfectly fine. That's the power user interface, if you will. The hypothesis here is that within our customer base, that additional new users who haven't been working with DataConnect tooling will be able to access it easier. And that said, even for simple mapping tasks, even the expert users can take advantage of this. So that's the thought process there. And again, handful of connectors now will improve that over the coming year. And then the next slide has a shot of what the mapping interface itself looks like. This is an early version of it that I took. So you can do the same kind of things where you schema mapping, change field names, data types, and all that good stuff. And if you can actually, right now, you can type in the expression if you know what the syntax is. But we're going to add this really cool feature. It's using a Blockly library from Google that allows you to do drag and drop scripting that implements our EasyScript expression language right there in the browser interface for you. So that'll be something to look forward to, I think, if you haven't used it, or if you have new users within your organizations that you want to start giving access to the integration software to. So that is a really quick drive-by. I think what do we have on the next slide? Is that the roadmap? Yeah, there you go. Now we've taken up all the time, so I'll be as quick as possible here. The themes: usability, connectivity management. A real quick word on usability. I said this earlier when we did some user interviews with the people that helped us look at DataProfiler and the early release of 12. We've always solicited user input for new features, but what I'm proud to say now that Actian has made a real formal commitment to going all in on a UX, institutionalizing UX and integrating UX designers with our engineering teams. So you'll probably be asked for input in the future, but the good thing about that is that those UX designers who you'll be talking to will actually be working shoulder to shoulder with the engineers to deliver software and features that we know you all want and like. So again, it's a big commitment to Actian to do that, and I'm really looking forward to some cool things in the future as a result of it. And as we work throughout this next year, I think I also mentioned that those people who helped us, a lot of the feedback is it was a little early or a little late in the development cycle to implement right away, but we will be implementing that over time going into 2022, and especially in profiling. And I think one area that we want to focus on in particular is going to be duplicate detection. So bringing things like fuzzy matching and additional enhanced duplicate detection into the mix as well. And also the other thing that we heard kind of across the board was that just a guided workflow or a wizard, if you will, it would help new users tremendously to take advantage of those features. So that as part of usability, and then debugging and anything that reduces the amount of scripting that you all have to write are things that we're looking at. So this auto scaling applies to maps. That's the first step scripting is the first step that we're actually doing to building the infrastructure around. But maps then is really where we think the big workhorse is going to be. And the idea here is that if you have a map where you have to process 1 billion records, then what this will do is automatically scale to some number like 10 threads, where it's running 10 concurrent instances of that map with 10 chunks of the incoming source file. And all of that stuff, you can do all of that today if you design the process with 10 branches in it. But the idea here is that you design a process with 1 branch in it that does what you want it to do. And then you click a couple settings that say, give me 10 copies of this. And it'll do all of the work behind the scenes to manage the threading and the splitting of the file and that sort of thing. And then some other smallish type feature enhancements that should save a lot of time. It's like, for instance, I can imagine most of you use log message in just about every script you write. And if you turn on the debugging in the process, we're essentially giving you in a UI what you would otherwise use a log message function to capture in the log. So the idea here is just to automatically populate those into the log so that the values persist, and so that you'll have them, and you can run a map and see the value of your variable at any given point in time, and it persists after the map's over. So then you can go back and make changes, and you can turn that on or off. So it's not like it's code that's going to be in there every time, or once you move something to production and you want to reduce the amount of logging, you can just do that with the flip of a switch. Little things like that. Alongside or along the lines of the simplified mapping interface, we want to do another one I know a lot of people look at this and they think we're doing Process Designer as a web interface, but that's not really the case. It's more of a way to do like event scheduling. And the idea here is that say you have 5 integrations that you've already published to Integration Manager, they're already configured, and maybe even they're scheduled. Well, say maybe you want to just schedule 1 integration to run at a certain time, and then you just want to have a configuration that says, after that integration runs, run integration 2 and then integration 3. And then when integration 3 finishes, run integration 4 and integration 5 in parallel. And then when those are done, run integration 6. And so you can string together a bunch of integrations as a pipeline, if you will. So orchestrating integrations that you built, or job orchestrations, because it'll actually run jobs based on whatever integrations you have configured. And then it'll allow you to build smaller processes, or let's say more compact with maybe less logic in them. Because what we've seen over the years, people build really big, elaborate processes with hundreds of steps. And the idea here is that maybe you should build 5 processes with only 20 steps each, instead of 1 process with 100 steps. So it reduces code maintenance costs and all kinds of things. And then with this higher level or higher order orchestration UI, you can then drag and drop those component parts together in whatever workflow you want to build out a bigger data integration pipeline. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll have pictures for you next time. And then as far as connectivity, the big ones here, I think there's some that we always do updates. Oh, I do want to mention the migration thing that Chris was showing you. The reason that came into being, there were times when, and the example he showed is perfect one, Oracle Siebel On Demand, really old application. They update their client interface, and now we effectively have to write a new connector, even though it's really to the same application. So our customers have written maps that have a lot of logic, a lot of processes that have a lot of logic. And then if the client interface or the underlying driver or API changes significantly enough where we have to write a new connector, then we don't want you to lose all the work that you've already put into those maps and process artifacts. But unfortunately, you click on the connector change button and it wipes everything out, then that's what happens. So that's why Chris said you go into the back end and you make the change just to the artifact directly. And then hopefully when you load it back up into the design editor, it works. Well, the idea with that migration utility is that we do all that work for you, do a backup, make the changes, give you some prompts to show you, ask you questions about what you do want to change, what you don't want to change, that sort of thing. So it's great for when underlying API or interface changes. It also, and I'll defer to Chris on this, but one of the other intentions was to allow you to switch, say, from Oracle to SQL Server if you want to change the databases themselves. So they have to be similar, like connectors. But the idea, again, be able to save and reuse a lot of the logic and the mapping rules and stuff that you've already implemented in one place. Just because you want to port that map to another database, you don't want to have to start from scratch. That's the idea there. Okay, so let me just finish this out here. Cloud mapping connectors, that's a big one. So we want to be able to map directly from Google, Amazon S3, and Azure storage buckets on the cloud. Right now, we have queue components that allow you to do that, but what that means is that you have to stage the data. So you have to make one extra hop with a file before you can actually read it into our mapping engine. And so the idea here is to eliminate that hop altogether, allow you to read files directly from those storage buckets. And then to go hand in hand with that, one of the things that we're adding onto the integration manager side are file folder listeners for those same cloud storage platforms. So file folder listener is one of our probably most popular features of integration manager. Is that basically, for those of you who don't know, if a file lands in a directory on your network, then the file folder listener can be configured to automatically run an integration when that file arrives. So you can think of it kind of as an event or a message queue in that regard. And it's a form of automation. So you don't have to schedule a job to run every 5 minutes. It just runs whenever there's data there. And the idea here is now we're going to extend that file folder listener to support this cloud storage platforms as well. And then just one other thing I would touch on is we have a few different component parts, and they each have their own installers. And you download that. You download each of those through ESD. What we want to do is really put together more of a unified approach to installing these various component parts, so that you install a little setup app locally, and then it behind the scenes will download the component parts you need and run installer for you with some prompts. So a little bit more of a unified approach to installing these software bits. And that's about as fast as I can talk, and we're already over time. So I think I'll turn it back over to Chris here. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Chris. I think you can.
Sure.
You wanted to touch on this.
Yeah. So I want to encourage all of our users to leverage the Accu Academy where version 12 is concerned. There's a lot of content, a lot of videos being developed specifically around some of these topics. So when you do find yourself installing version 12, just take a few minutes to go watch some of those videos. That'll give you kind of a head start on getting up to speed with the changes and the new features. And I just think it'll be really helpful. So from there, let's see if we have any questions. I think Tracy may have been answering questions while we were speaking, Greg.
Yeah, we're pretty over time. We did have a couple of questions come in, but just for the sake of nothing, I think that we need to keep everybody on for, since we are already 7 minutes over time. But we will absolutely get to everybody individually by the end of the week. So thank you for your questions that were submitted.
Okay. With that, I guess we can wrap up, Greg.
Yeah, thanks again. Appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah,
Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye all.